Hello fantastic creatures, I'm Fantasims and today I'm going to show you how I made this fancy schmancy Japanese inspired fantasy roof decoration. This is part of a project I'm working on for my wonderful, incredible friend Sadie Sim, who makes the most beautiful builds I've ever seen, so check out her channel, I'll put her link in the description below. Now normally a terracotta roof has rounded tiles, so to get that 3D roof effect with these jade coloured pedestals from Jungle Adventure, I created 2 layers of tile with a layer of bigger tiles on the bottom and strips of smaller tiles on top that I tilted at a 45-degree angle with T.O.O.L mod. And as Sadie Sim pointed out, these stone pedestals have a sparkling effect in the sunlight, so that helps them to look even more luxurious for a Japanese palace. To save me time, I copied rooms of the roof section I already made so that all I had to do was drag the tiles over. I wanted the base of the roof to flare out a little, so I tilted a row of tiles back by 15 degrees and I lowered them onto the ground. I've never played much with the Alt key placement feature of the T.O.O.L mod that lets you move items together in live mode by tapping the Alt key towards the location you want it to go. As you see, I'm not a pro at doing it and it takes me a while to get it where I want it to go, but I'm getting better at it and it saves hours of repositioning everything in build mode. I copied the roof section onto the other side. It didn't align perfectly, but I figured it was fine because I'd hide the connecting point with a roof trim. I then used this debug bridge from Island Living as a base for the roof and as a guide to curve the tiles. At first I elevated strips of the roof in 0.1 increments, but then I later reshaped the roof a couple times. So there's a very dramatic backstory I came up with for this build that also includes an NPC townie from the game that I'll wait to divulge until I show you the full build in a future video. But I can tell you that this roof was inspired by the ancient Japanese Nure-onna myth and the new Japanese themed Snowy Escape expansion pack we're getting. I love to rotate objects in circles, as you can see all over this lot I'm working on. To do this, it's super easy. Just elevate an object, clone it with T.O.O.L mod, rotate them in 10-degree increments, then copy and paste that quarter circle 3 more times and rotate each of those sections by 90, 180 and 270. Then merge them together to make a full circle. Then clone that circle and rotate all the pieces by 5 degrees. Then merge the circles again and you have a ton of objects in 5-degree increments that you can use to create curved shapes. I chose this Journey to Batu bird statue because it has scales in the perfect colour for the roof and fits the Nure-onna myth for this build. Now the closest thing ancient Japanese myth has to a vampire is the Nure-onna, who is depicted as a snake with a woman's head who haunts the ocean shores and riverbanks seeking to devour humans. So I wanted to shape the roof and trim to have a serpent feel to it. And let me tell you, it took me hours and hours to shape these birds into a snake because the wood parts kept poking through, but I finally got there in the end. Seriously, this roof decoration ended up taking me 4 days to construct. Anyway, now the curve I created for the snake was different to the roof. The curve was a lot higher, so I then elevated the tiles to reshape them to flow with the snake trim. But it created a problem because it no longer flowed with the wood bridge underneath, and the edges of the roof now looked unfinished with a gap. So I elevated the whole roof and used more tiles sideways to neaten the edges. I just held the Alt key in build mode to swivel the tiles, which is easier than trying to figure out the angles with T.O.O.L mod, and then I used T.O.O.L to tweak those angles and the elevation so that it looked as smooth and neat as I could possibly make it. Then I cloned it and flipped it over by 180 degrees to create a mirror image for the other side and used Alt placement again. Now I'm detailing what I did with angles and rotations all up front, so sorry if it has been an overwhelming couple of minutes. This is not meant to be a tutorial video, so I won't spell it out the whole time because most of it is a repeat of what I just described. Otherwise this will sound like a math lesson, but I do want to share some of the details for those of you who'd like to have a crack at trying this out in your own builds. My library is full of pre-rotated objects, and this is a wheel of the vampire cribs that I rotated and then turned some of the objects in the wheel around with the period and comma keys, and you can come up with really unique patterns this way. Now I'd be happy to share rooms of rotated wheels like this if you're interested. I know it might be helpful for you console players who can't use T.O.O.L mod, that way you can have access to rotated objects. If that's something you'd like me to do, do, please comment below. I'd love to help you guys out in any way I can. Also, if there's a specific object you'd like me to rotate, just let me know. It only takes a couple of minutes to make these wheels. Now, for all of those people who thought Journey to Batuu items would only work in sci-fi builds, I'm here to show you that you can build fantasy and other styles with it, which is what I do here with these round vents and those bird statues I used, and another object you'll see in a bit. For the front of this roof tower I'm creating, I wanted another type of curved roof at the front, so I used a jade stone wheel I already had rotated from another project, and I used the side of two sized up couches from Seasons as a guide because it created a half circle shape. Then duplicated the arch to use the stones to make another curved shape that flips out. Now you'll see me do this a lot where I select every other object with tool mod and scale it to be either 0.01 bigger or smaller to resolve flickering issues when you layer objects. So in this case I made every other stone 0.99 and left the others at the original scale of 1. I could have also made them 1.01, either way works fine because it is such a small fraction of difference, but it's enough to remove most flickering issues. Now off camera it took me ages searching through the catalogue for a wood swatch that would work well with the debug wood bridge I used, and after hours of playing around I came across the Vampire's wood coffin that has a wonderful aged look to it, and it is a bit more of a yellow tone wood, but it was the closest I could find. So I used it for the body of the tower, and you will see me also using the red fancy coffin too, but I later changed them all to the yellow wood version because it looks way more cohesive to keep them all the same. I realized this when I kept adding details, it just looked too cluttered visually. Now the curve I made with the coffin isn't as smooth as I'd like it to be, and maybe if I sized it down I could have made it better, but I've been trying to adopt this philosophy of being happy with a build once it reaches 70 to 80% of what I think it should be. I'm a bit of a perfectionist if you haven't noticed, and I watched a video from an illustrator who talked about how it's better to put out several projects at 70% than one project at 100%. My mum is also a licensed therapist, and she has talked to me about the same kind of concept of aiming for 80%, especially if you are an all or nothing type of thinker like me. Either I do it perfectly or I give up. I have gotten better with this as I've gotten older, but you guys know I struggle to finish builds, and part of the issue is having ADD of course, but also I give up when I get overwhelmed that I can't make it look exactly like what I see in my head. But I've been trying to tell myself that I don't have to accomplish every build trick in one build, and I don't have to give up if a build doesn't look how I fully imagined it. If it looks 70 to 80% of the general idea I was going for, it is good enough. Thinking this way is really helping me to get things done, so I thought I'd share it with you in case any of you are like me. Now to catch up on what you just saw me do, I did make another jade wheel because the one I made in 10-degree increments didn't shape around the coffin tube thing I made, so instead I rotated it in 22.5 increments so that it goes 22.5, 45, 67.5, 90 degrees and so on. I then layered 3 copper cauldrons in slightly smaller sizes because the wood arch was clipping through the big cauldron, but I'm glad it created that problem, else I never would have thought to layer them, and I think it has a nicer 3D shape that way anyway. Here I'm making the roof topper that will sit at the top of the tower, and originally I had a different shape in mind, but the thought of creating a new roof and doing the tile process over again was too much. Remember, we're aiming for 70% my loves, so I just copied the roof shape I already made and patchworked it to make a new roof. I used the snake trim on the bottom edge and had to try and re-angle them to fit better, but it ends up all getting covered anyway, so that was a bit pointless. But most of the time I'm just making stuff up as I go, so I end up deleting half the stuff anyway. This next part took me hours, and I later discovered that it would have been quicker to elevate the roof and delete all the excess tiles that remained underneath. You see, by copying and pasting the roof on top of each other, it meant that tons of tiles in the center that you can't even see are layered underneath. I knew that the more objects I used, the more it will cause some computers to lag, so leaving them there would create unnecessary problems. So you see me pulling apart the roof I made to try and get in there and delete all the excess objects. This took me hours, but part of that might be because I live in Michigan, and as soon as the gloomy fall weather hits, I am even more of a zombie until next summer, so I'm even slower than usual. I later elevate the roof and discover a bunch of objects I missed, so I should have just done that to begin with, but it's a learning process, and I'll know to do that next time. This is the last roof piece I create. I wanted these elevated roof tips with a fun curved and pointed shape, and again we are just copying and pasting what I've already made to try and save some time. It still took me 4 days to finish this whole project, but it would have been longer. The challenge with this roof section though was that the roof tip not only needed to curve upwards but also inwards, so I had to tilt the tiles on 3 different axes axis angles, which can be tricky. The challenge with the upward curve was figuring out how steep to make it so that the bottom layer of tiles don't poke through, and so that there isn't a huge gap between the bottom tile layer and the trim. I figured it out after a lot of fussing around with it, and it took me several attempts to get it right. So if it seems like I know what I'm doing, be encouraged by the fact that I had 14 hours of footage and a lot of stuff was done off camera, so you only see the highlights when I finally got it right. Then after I created the upward curve, it needed to tilt inwards towards the slope of the roof, so I tilted the tiles inwards by 10 degrees and repositioned everything, and then duplicated it and mirror imaged it by turning it 180 degrees like I showed you before, because there's no way I'd remember all the different angles and elevations I did. That's why the cloning feature of T.O.O.L mod is so amazing. Then I realized that after shaping the trim up and sloping it in, it also needed to be rotated on a third axis as well, because the tip of the roof gets thinner, like a beak or a dragon claw. So I rotated all the tiles except for the first one in towards the tip by 10 degrees, and then again at 20 degrees for a total of 30 degrees, I think. This was the hardest roof piece to shape, and my explanation probably sounds confusing, but hopefully you get the idea by what you can see me doing here. If it goes too fast, you can always click on the cog icon on this video at the bottom and change the playback speed to like 0.25 to slow it down if you want to see the process with greater detail. Now this is the halfway point of my build. The main shapes and design are done, but now we need to add all the details to put it all together. So I'm adding a trim of the coffins to the top roof, and then because the underbelly of the pointed roof tip looked unfinished, I curved the fancy coffins to hide the jagged edges. Now even though I got rid of these coffins in the main body of the tower, I kept them on this roof tip underbelly because there's no way I was going to go through the process of tilting the coffins again. 70%. 70% we're aiming for. Then I used base game wood thingies, I don't know what they're called, but they look like beams, and I added rotated flower candles that I used throughout every section of the roof tower to tie in the colours and make it look more ornate. Now I forgot to mention that the gold wheels I made for the rooftop are the toilets from Get Famous. I kid you not. Those blinging bogs are now fancy flowers and are so expensive, this roof ends up costing 5 million simoleons. Ka-ching! So I wanted to carry the gold decor throughout the roof, so I decided to slope these Get Famous roof decor spikes in descending size to add some flair. The little gold wheels you see me use are made from base game. It's this fitness trophy of a hand holding a dumbbell weight, and I used two variations of that wheel. The second one looks more like a flower because I rotated every other object in the wheel with the period or comma key like I mentioned before. But this first one here, I just simply resized the north, east, south and west facing ones to give it a different shape than just a round wheel. Now what is this magic you are seeing here? Can Kara reshape objects with her mind powers? No, unfortunately I'm a mere muggle, but I was able to shape these Get Famous swan signs from an oval into a circle because some objects can't be rotated, so when you try, it sometimes smushes them. I mean, I make it sound like I knew it would do that, but I actually was trying to rotate it and I forgot that I couldn't, so I came up with another plan for it instead. I used the rounded version to add more bling to the gold flower wheels, and I think it framed it quite nicely. I love how speed builds make me look like I can build seamlessly. I look like a pro. It's like makeup for the building process. Flawless, baby. But the reality is I'm super clumsy, but including all that footage would make for a 2-hour video. Ain't nobody got time for that. Anyway, I'm just adding more gold elements, repeating the objects I've used elsewhere, which is important in architecture. If you want something to look cohesive, you just repeat patterns and designs and colors and textures and it will flow together a lot better. I jumped back over to the roof tip piece, and this also took a couple hours of trial and error with different gold objects, and the only one I found that could work was these yellow stones that power the lightsabers from Journey to Batuu. They were a bit of a nightmare though, because the green footprint of the object is so huge that it blocks the objects behind it if you try to click on them. So in the future I had to separate this gold tip from the rest of the roof as a separate room just so I could tweak the roof and elevate it properly, but I cut out most of that footage because it was boring. Anyway, the tip wasn't as smooth as I'd like it to be. It has a jagged edge at the top, but good enough, right? I still think it looks cool and makes the roof tip look dramatic. There were a couple of gaps and I just filled them with smaller stones as a quick fix. I go around replacing those fancy coffins with the yellow-brown wood ones and add the rotated tubes of coffins I've already used throughout this build, which gives the edges a fun curved shape. and hides the white base of the swan signs. Plus, it makes that center jade and wood arch look like it flows over to the edges and wraps around, which I love. Now, the white bases of the swan signs were also visible through the cauldron centerpiece, so I pulled them out a bit, which actually ended up looking better because the copper cauldron has some green patina around it that ties into the color of the jade roof beautifully. I used the green signs from, I think, City Living to cap off the tips of the coffin tubes because I didn't want to use that vampire baby crib flower wheel like I used before because it's unnecessary to use that many objects in such a small space. And here we are at the grand finale. Now, it was just a matter of elevating everything on top of each other. A huge tip when building something like this: make sure to save the rooms continually as you progress, so that if a glitch happens, you have a backup just in case. Also, if you're elevating something high enough, make sure to elevate groups of objects in sections for two reasons. One, if you spend ages clicking on all these objects to add them to the group, like the green ones pictured here, if you accidentally click something without the Alt key, it will move everything out of place. And sometimes the undo feature doesn't work on large groups of objects, or it unhighlights everything you've just spent ages selecting and you have to do it all over again. So doing it in sections avoids that. And the second reason is, unless you have a super powerful computer, elevating hundreds of objects at once can be too much for the game to process and can make it crash or glitch. So I saved the rooms as elevated portions of the roof so that I wouldn't have to redo the whole thing, because it takes a few hours to elevate everything as I go extra slow to make sure I don't accidentally unclick everything or accidentally move all the pieces out of alignment. It's tedious but worth it. And I named the rooms things like elevation in progress or roof tip without gold, just so that when I go back to my library I know which rooms to use because I always forget the next day. I elevated the base by 7 so that I could fit these bamboo stilts underneath. This way there's room to fit a normal roof underneath as well. Originally I was going to create another roof piece with objects, but I realized that was just too much and I still need to allow for more objects throughout the build, so I didn't want to bog it down with unnecessary decor. The pointed claw roof tips were elevated by I think 11 so that they sit just above the main roof, and this last top roof layer was elevated by 17.5. Now I saved the base roof as a separate room and bulldozed the lot because I knew that elevating this top roof layer would take a lot of oomph from my 8-year-old iMac computer. I mean, it can handle a lot, but I didn't want to push it, so I elevated the rooftop separately just in case. Also, I tested elevation levels out first by using the bamboo post as a guide and a coffin to see how high I wanted each roof level, because if you don't test it out first, you're going to have to reselect every single object on each roof and elevate it over and over till you get it right. It doesn't seem like it would take hours to elevate this stuff, but it does. Now, after elevating the roof, you can see all the unnecessary objects hidden underneath, so I deleted them and then resized the coffins by a fraction to remove flickering. Once everything was elevated, I saved it as a room, bulldozed the lot again, placed the base tower, and then positioned the rooftop. I didn't notice until everything was placed that the huge gold flower and the brown flower on the base are similar sizes. I probably would have changed that design a bit, but Japanese palaces do have that stacked look to it, so I don't think it's too bad. Plus, it's already more than 80% of what I wanted it to look like, so I was happy to be done. And here it is finished! It turned out massive and way bigger than I originally planned, but I think it looks pretty cool. I will post these roof pieces and the full roof tower as rooms you can download from my gallery, and you can customize it and stack it however you like. Also, because the tiles, coffins, and other objects used come in different color swatches, you can come up with a ton of different variations in white, grey, black, pink, and I can't remember the other colors, but anyway, just hashtag me fantasims in your builds so I can see what you come up with. I'll put the link to this room in the gallery in the description below and comment section below. I hope you had fun with me today. I never know how fast or slow to make my videos, and I know everyone has a different preference, so I hope the footage wasn't too fast for comfort. I always appreciate your feedback. Hopefully the audio is better in this video than the last one too. I'm not very tech savvy, but I'm trying to get better with each video. Anyway, I love you guys so freaking much, and until we meet again, have a glorious week. Love ya!